I invite you to take a time with me of prayer and meditation. And if it helps you to relax, just take a breath. And we let go of the stress of the day, the stress of the week, anything that has come before this moment. I invite you to find that quiet space within yourself. That space and place where you and God are alone together. In perfect oneness. And in this quiet moment, in the perfect stillness and peacefulness, we open our minds and hearts to be inspired by the very presence of God within us. Let's take this prayer thought into this quiet moment. Aligned with the divine within, I use my will to direct my life. Aligned with the divine within, I use my will to direct my life. When I feel lost or without direction, I wonder how to best use my will to choose the best way forward. I can use my willingness to spiritually surrender, to listen for divine guidance, and trust its direction. I can also use my understanding to make things happen in my world. Perhaps the most effective thing I can do is to use my spiritual gift of will, my power to choose, to move in my desired direction. We always have a choice. Always. And it's our ability to choose that moves us forward, helps us to become unstuck, and choose to experience something better. Spending time in contemplative silence, I pray to use my will to live my dreams. I understand that each time I make a choice, I am declaring who I want to be and what I want to do, and how my life is going to unfold, and what I will become. I make my choices mindfully, trusting the divine within is guiding me toward my best life. in this quiet moment, we choose to live our best life, our happiest life, our most loving life, a joyous life, a prosperous life, and so much more. Aligned with the divine within, I use my will to direct my life. And I live my best life. Loving Spirit, we are so grateful to understand how to best use our gift of will. We ask for your guidance and your direction in assisting us in making those choices that bring about our best life. For this and so much more, we are truly, truly grateful. And so it is. Amen. Okay, before I start, at my church, we always have to tell a joke or two just to get people loosened up. What kind of shoes do frogs wear when spring comes? Open-toed. If April showers bring Mayflowers, what do Mayflowers bring?
Pilgrims.
That's right, pilgrims.
Okay.
What does corn say when it gets a compliment? Aw, shucks. And the last one. Why do seagulls fly over the sea? Because if they flew over the bay, they would be bagels. Sometimes the corniest jokes are the best ones. Okay. Today my talk is on the gift of will. And will is one of our 12 powers. I always knew for a long time since I took my licensed teacher training that will is our ability to choose. But in preparing this lesson, I learned something that I didn't know before. Charles Fillmore wrote, quote, "The will is the executive power of the mind," end quote. Now, if you think about an executive of a company or a business, what would that executive be doing? You can answer. They would be in a position of directing activity and directing the employees, guiding how the business would go and how it evolves and so forth. So if you think about all of those executive type of duties, it would help you to understand his statement a little bit better. This means that the first power that activates in any instance is the will, your ability to choose. Mr. Fillmore also wrote, quote, "The will moves to action all the other faculties of the mind and seems to be the whole process," end quote. So the very first power of the 12 that moves into action Anytime is the gift of will. And so it's now the director and the executive that's directing the other powers on when and how to become active. So let's say, for example, if there's a conflict, the will would say probably, I think we need to have understanding come into activity. And will and understanding work very well together. And then it might say, well, I think we should activate love and get some compassion and kindness in here. I think you understand what I'm saying. So it activates the other powers as they're needed. But will is always the first one that becomes active. Will develops in the middle of the forehead, close to the seat of understanding in the front brain. Will determines the movement, while understanding decrees the direction. Will and understanding are twin powers, constantly working together to make connection between the invisible world of thought and the outer world of manifestation. There is a difference between willfulness and willingness. Willfulness is resistant, stubborn, self-centered, and outwardly focused, whereas willingness is non-resistant, open and receptive, God-centered, and inwardly focused. A prime example of this is found in the Bible story of Moses appearing before Pharaoh, asking for the Israelites to be set free from bondage. Moses would ask to have the people let go. Pharaoh would refuse, and each time he refused, he brought a plague upon the whole country of Egypt. 10 times he refused. So there were 10 plagues. Until the final plague cost him his own son. Finally, Pharaoh agreed to free the Israelites. However, Pharaoh sent his army to destroy the Israelites just as they approached the Red Sea. And of course, we know they got across. The willingness of the people to follow Moses and obey God's will saved them, whereas the willfulness of Pharaoh got his entire army swallowed up in the sea. Cora Fillmore, who was Charles Fillmore's second wife, wrote, quote, "We have become willful, which is the cause of much of our suffering. We have lost almost all conception of what it is to hear and heed the voice of the indwelling Lord." End quote. And our suffering is caused by my will. This is what I want, and this is how I'm going to get it. Which is different than asking for the guidance of divine will and listening to the instruction and moving in accordance with that instruction. It makes a big difference. Do you remember the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? I would like to share with you the story, and there's a reason for that. Because it's probably the best story about the use of the will. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, which are James and John. And he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them asleep, and said to Peter, "What, could you not watch with me 1 hour?" I think they had a little too much wine at the Last Supper, so they were pretty sleepy. Jesus goes on to say, "Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." You can see now how his will is starting to change. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, he who betrays me is at hand." And so it took him 3 times. And I'm sure he had been thinking about it even before he got to the garden. Am I going to be able to commit to this? Am I willing to commit to this? This looks pretty scary. I don't know. We've all been there. We've all been there. There are things in everyday life that we look at and say, well, I don't know. And yet we know it's ours to do. And it's much easier if we say, "I'm willing to do your will, God." And I'll tell a story on myself, which is really kind of silly, but it's part of life. I had to have a colonoscopy on Friday. I didn't want to have one. You know, if you talk to anybody, you get a different story every time about everybody's experience. But the only one that really matters is your own experience. And, you know, you have liquids the whole day before. 5 o'clock, you start drinking that goofy solution. And then you spend hours in the bathroom. I was smart enough to go buy a package of diapers so that I wouldn't have any accidents. Even going to the hospital, I wore a diaper just so I wouldn't soil my friend's car. And then the following day is the surgery. They had us have to be there by 7:30 in the morning, and it was all the way down in Taylor. So I was up at 6:30 trying to get myself in order. And my driver had to get up at 5:30 because he was coming from Redford to Ferndale, and then we were going back to Taylor. But really, it went very smooth. I was really tired yesterday, but it went very smooth. And I was resistant as HE double toothpicks. I was really resistant. I'd put this off my entire life until I had to. And when the doctor came in to talk to me, she said, "I took out 4 big polyps. You know, they've been in there growing for a long time." I said, "Well, yeah, I bet." Being that this is the only one I ever had. And so she said, "But there's no sign of cancer." And I went, hoo-hoo. So getting through it and looking back on it, I frightened myself to the point where I thought, this is not for me. I'm not going to be able to wrap my head around this. And I mean, really, it's kind of silly. It was inconvenient to a point, but it's something that saved my life, because those things can turn into cancer. And so, was it worth the effort? Yeah. Did it take a lot of energy to wrap my head around that? Yeah. We humans are kind of silly. So getting back to Jesus, he went into the garden 3 times, and each time praying to be willing to allow God's will to be done. This was not an easy task to move from unwillingness, doubt, and hesitation to a full commitment to thy will be done. We've had times when it has been difficult to align with divine will because we feel God's will won't work in our favor. Knowing and understanding that God's will for us is only good perhaps may change our mind. Charles Fillmore wrote, quote, "When man wills the will of God to be done, he forms spiritual character. The use of the regenerate will is for the sole purpose of spiritual unfoldment," end quote. We become stronger in our creative power and ability to express our spiritual identity. Our life becomes filled with love, joy, happiness, prosperity, good health, and so much more. Jesus taught to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. In order to become an effective co-creator with God, we must allow our will to choose to focus all of our spiritual powers to align with divine will. Or we could say, to be under the direction of the Christ presence, which is our crown area here. Man and woman were given free will when they were created and placed in the Garden of Eden. They had free reign, except they were told, "Do not eat of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." But the serpent entices Eve into eating the apple from the forbidden tree, and then she gives it to Adam to eat. Acting from self-will caused them to fall from grace, and they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. Once they knew of good and evil, they couldn't unknow. They couldn't unknow that. When they left the garden, the results were of their actions that followed them outside of the garden, and the results followed them their entire life. God gave us free will to make our own choices, and we were created as free agents in the possession and the use of our faculty of will. The principle of free will means that God does not predestine our life. If our lives were predestined, we would be puppets or automatons, but we're not. We have free choice. We are free agents to choose, hopefully as we are guided by God. At my church at Christmas time, we also do a 12 hours candle lighting. And we use unity material depending on who's facilitating the service, but we always do the 12 disciples and the candles. And last Christmas, I chose the disciple Matthew, who represents will. Before becoming a disciple, Matthew was a tax collector. And when Jesus called him to become a disciple, he dropped everything and went to follow Jesus. He was all in. He didn't question, "What, you want me? Are you sure?" He dropped everything. He was all in. I always think it's interesting how it works out that we choose just the right power to concentrate on for the year in those candlelighting services. This year has been a year of making new choices, releasing old habits, eliminating drama, choosing peacemaking, changing my lifestyle, and making decisions about my health, and finally having a colonoscopy. Those grown-up decisions, not the ones about should I have chocolate cake or potato chips. Real adult decisions about what do I need to do here, and I better get with it. As we get older, life changes, and we learn to make better choices. and we understand why those choices are necessary, then we can follow through to bring about better results. Remember, will is the executive power of the mind, directing all the other powers and how to align with the Christ presence within and the divine will. So use your will wisely. Choose wisely. Always ask for guidance and direction. And if you make a wrong choice, a poor choice, a not so good choice, make another one. Make a better one. Decide to live your best life. Thank you for joining me this morning. I appreciate your presence and your support. I hope you got something out of today, and it was my pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you.